In April 2018, a plane touched down in central Mozambique carrying cargo that no airline manifest had ever listed before. A pack of African wild dogs, crated and sedated, on their way to a park where their kind had not set a paw in over a quarter of a century. What happened after that gate swung open would go on to be documented in a peer-reviewed scientific study, and the speed of it caught even the researchers who planned it off guard. This is the story of how one of the continent's most efficient hunters came back from local extinction, and why bringing it home may have done more to heal a broken ecosystem than anything else conservationists had tried in the previous 40 years. To understand why this reintroduction mattered so much, you have to understand what Gorongosa National Park lost. Sitting at the southern tip of Africa's Great Rift Valley in Mozambique's Sofala province, Gorongosa was once spoken of in the same breath as the Serengeti. Its unique geography, a single mountain massif feeding a network of rivers into vast seasonal floodplains, supported one of the densest concentrations of large mammals anywhere on the continent. Elephant herds, buffalo, zebra, wildebeest, and hippos moved across the plains in numbers that drew filmmakers and safari-goers from around the world through the 1950s and 60s. Then, in 1977, Mozambique descended into a civil war that would grind on for 15 years. Gorongosa sat close to the front lines, and its wildlife paid the price. Animals were killed for food to sustain fighters on both sides, and elephants were slaughtered for ivory to help finance the conflict. By the time peace returned in 1992, the scale of loss was almost unimaginable. According to the Gorongosa Project's own historical accounts, large mammal populations in the park had collapsed by more than 90%. Predators were hit hardest of all. Leopards and spotted hyenas were functionally wiped out, and the African wild dog vanished from the park entirely. For nearly 3 decades afterward, Gorongosa's story was one of quiet absence. The mountains still stood, the rivers still ran, but the intricate web of predator and prey that had defined the landscape for millennia had been torn apart. Recovery didn't happen by accident. In 2007, the Mozambican government partnered with American philanthropist Greg Carr to launch the Gorongosa Restoration Project, a long-term effort combining ecological restoration with investment in the surrounding communities. Rangers, eventually numbering in the hundreds, fanned out to stop poaching and clear snares, giving the park's surviving herbivores room to breed again. It worked, and it worked well. By 2018, large herbivore populations in Gorongosa had rebounded by roughly 95% of pre-war levels, according to research later published in the journal PLOS One. Buffalo, waterbuck, and other grazers returned to the floodplains in numbers not seen since before the war. Lions, once reduced to a few dozen individuals, climbed back into the hundreds. On paper, that looked like victory. But ecologists studying the park knew that raw population numbers only told half the story. An ecosystem isn't simply a tally of animals, it's a set of relationships. And the most powerful of those relationships run between predator and prey. Gorongosa's herbivores were thriving, but they were doing so almost entirely free of pursuit. The park's full predator guild, leopards, spotted hyenas, and especially the wild dog, was still missing. Only lions held even a partial foothold, and their numbers remained far below what the swelling herds could realistically support. Researchers observed something almost unnatural. Herds standing in the open for long stretches, grazing without vigilance, drifting into terrain their ancestors would have avoided. Princeton ecologist Robert Pringle and doctoral researcher Justine Atkins, working in the park, documented this directly in bushbuck, a naturally shy antelope that normally sticks close to thick cover. In a landscape empty of predators, Gorongosa's bushbuck had begun venturing boldly into open floodplains. When Atkins and Pringle played recorded predator calls and laid down carnivore scent in those open areas, the bushbuck reaction was immediate, a retreat back toward cover, as though an old instinct had simply been waiting to be switched back on. That finding pointed to something conservationists were only beginning to fully appreciate. Predators don't just remove prey through killing. Their presence, the mere threat of them, reshapes how every other animal in the system behaves. Ecologists call this dynamic the landscape of fear, And without it, an ecosystem can start to drift out of balance, even while its raw numbers look healthy. The conclusion the Gorongosa Restoration Project reached was straightforward, if daunting. Restoring the herds wasn't enough. To truly rebuild the ecosystem, they would need to restore its hunters. And the first of those hunters back through the gate would be the African wild dog. The species chosen to lead this reintroduction carries the scientific name Lycaon pictus, roughly painted wolf, a reference to the mottled black, tan, and white coat pattern that is unique to every individual, like a fingerprint. Depending on the region, they're called African wild dogs, painted wolves, or painted dogs. Whether they deserve the title of Africa's most dangerous animal depends entirely on how you define danger. If the measure is harm to humans, wild dogs don't come close to topping that list. That grim distinction belongs to animals responsible for far more human fatalities each year. But if the measure is hunting efficiency, the odds that once a chase begins, the predator actually catches its prey, the wild dog stands in a class by itself. Lions succeed in only about 1 in 4 hunting attempts. Cheetahs, despite their explosive speed, also fail more often than most people assume. African wild dogs, by contrast, are frequently cited by wildlife researchers as achieving hunting success rates between 60 and 80%, and sometimes higher, making them, by many measures, the most consistently successful large predator on the continent. The secret isn't size or brute strength. A lone wild dog weighs a fraction of what a lion does. It's the pack. Wild dogs hunt cooperatively, taking turns leading a chase, running prey down over long distances through sheer endurance rather than relying on a single ambush. Packs are known to engage in energetic pre-hunt rallies, bouts of circling, and vocalizing that appear to synchronize the group before a hunt begins. During the chase, dogs rotate position, cut off escape routes, and sustain pursuit long after most solitary predators would give up. It's a strategy built on communication and stamina rather than power, and it's brutally effective. That was the animal Gorongosa's conservation team decided to bring home first. There was an obvious problem. There were no wild dogs left anywhere in Mozambique to work with. The founding population would have to come from South Africa's KwaZulu-Natal region, home to one of the most successful managed wild dog metapopulations outside the country's largest national parks. A population that conservation groups had spent years using as a source for reintroductions elsewhere on the continent. According to reporting from Africa Geographic and the Endangered Wildlife Trust EWT, the effort was coordinated by the South African Wild Dog Advisory Group in partnership with the Zembalo KZN Wildlife and the conservation organization Wildlife ACT, with funding tied to the broader Gorongosa Restoration Project. The founding group combined 9 males that had naturally dispersed from an existing pack at Yumku's Game Reserve with 6 free-roaming females from the same region, 15 animals in total, according to Africa Geographic's coverage of the translocation. Assembling a wild dog pack isn't as simple as putting animals in the same enclosure. Wild dog society depends on tight social bonds, so the group was first given time together in a boma, a secure holding enclosure, in South Africa to begin forming those bonds before the international move. From there, the animals were flown across the border into Mozambique and placed into a second boma inside Gorongosa itself, where they spent roughly 6 to 8 weeks adjusting before release. That holding period wasn't incidental. It was central to the entire strategy. Wild dogs released immediately into unfamiliar territory often attempt to travel back toward their point of origin, sometimes over enormous distances and at serious risk to their survival. Holding them inside a fenced enclosure at the heart of their new home lets them feed, rest, and grow accustomed to the sounds and smells of the landscape before they're ever set loose in it, so that by the time the gate opens, the territory already feels familiar. The first pack, later referred to in research as the Gorongosa pack, was released on June 15, 2018, after roughly 8 weeks in the boma, based on the account published in PLOS 1 by the research team studying the reintroduction. A second pack, the Pwadzi pack, followed on December 10, 2018, after a shorter 5-week holding period. The stakes were enormous. Gorongosa spans roughly 4,000 square kilometers of recovering wilderness, prey-rich, but completely unfamiliar to every dog in the founding packs. Nobody involved could say with confidence whether the animals would settle, scatter, starve, or succeed. According to the PLOS One study, which tracked the reintroduced dogs over a 28-month period, the results defied the more cautious predictions. Within weeks of release, the dogs began using large sections of the park and hunting effectively on species they had never encountered before, adapting to unfamiliar terrain far faster than the research team had anticipated. Rather than attempting to return to South Africa, the packs settled into Gorongosa and began behaving like established residents. The study's authors evaluated the reintroduction's success across 5 key indicator categories, including survival, movement, reproduction, and pack formation. And the outcome across the board was positive. Both founding packs survived, expanded their territories, and hunted successfully across the recovering floodplain ecosystem. Perhaps most importantly, the dogs began to breed. The research documented 11 separate denning attempts across the 2018, 2019, and 2020 breeding seasons. The first wild dog pups born in Gorongosa in more than a generation. As the population grew, the rigid structure of the original founding packs began to dissolve naturally, with individuals dispersing and forming new pack configurations, exactly as wild dog populations do when left to their own devices, a clear sign, researchers noted, that the animals were no longer just surviving in Gorongosa, but genuinely living there. By 2019, follow-up reporting from the EWT put the population at 42 individuals from the first pack alone, before a second reintroduced group of 15 dogs brought the total population to 57 animals within 2 years of the initial release. And the PLOS One research team estimated that roughly 68% of the park still remained unused by the dogs at the time of the study, meaning there was enormous room left for the population to keep expanding. The wild dog's return didn't just add predators to a species count. It began to restore the invisible pressure that shapes how every other animal in the park behaves. As wild dog packs spread across previously unpressured territory, prey species that had spent 2 decades grazing without much vigilance had to relearn old habits, staying closer to cover, moving more frequently, avoiding the most exposed stretches of floodplain. That shift in behavior carries consequences that extend well beyond the animals being hunted. When herds stop camping indefinitely in one patch of grassland, vegetation in that patch gets a chance to recover, and grazing pressure spreads more evenly across the landscape. It's the same mechanism ecologists have documented in other predator reintroductions worldwide, most famously with wolves in Yellowstone National Park. The idea that a predator's influence on an ecosystem is felt less through the animals it kills than through the behavior it changes in everything it doesn't. In Gorongosa's case, the wild dogs were never intended to be the only piece of the puzzle. Their reintroduction was the opening move in a broader plan to rebuild the park's full predator guild. In the years following the 2018 release, Gorongosa also reintroduced leopards, which had been all but eliminated during the war, and spotted hyenas, restoring a scavenger species that plays its own role in keeping the ecosystem's disease and carcass cycles in check. None of it would have been possible without the less glamorous groundwork that preceded it. More than a decade of anti-poaching patrols, snare removal, and ranger deployment that made it safe enough for predators to be released in the first place. The wild dogs may have carried the headlines, but the protection that came before them is what gave the reintroduction any chance of working at all. The African wild dog is currently classified as endangered by the IUCN, with regional estimates suggesting only a few thousand mature individuals remain across the entire continent. Every pup born in Gorongosa represents a meaningful contribution to a species under pressure nearly everywhere in its range, and researchers involved in the project have suggested that a growing Gorongosa population could eventually help reconnect wild dogs across the broader Gorongosa-Maroma landscape in Sofala province. The broader lesson researchers and conservationists have drawn from Gorongosa is one that's reshaping how ecological restoration is approached elsewhere in the world. Rebuilding herbivore numbers is necessary, but it isn't sufficient. Real ecological recovery may depend on restoring the fear that predators put back into a landscape, the constant, largely invisible set of decisions prey animals make about where it's safe to eat, when to move, and when to stay hidden. Take that away for a generation, and an ecosystem can start to drift out of balance, even while every population count looks like a success story. Gorongosa's wild dogs proved that this kind of restoration doesn't necessarily require decades of trial and error. Given the right groundwork, protection, patience, and a properly bonded founding pack, a predator can reclaim its old territory and begin reshaping the landscape around it within a matter of months, not years. It's a result that has changed how conservationists in Gorongosa and beyond think about what it actually means to heal a broken wild place, not simply to protect what's left, but to identify what's missing and bring it home. Sources referenced: Gorongosa Project, Endangered Wildlife Trust, Wildlife ACT, Africa Geographic, and Atkins J.L. et al. The Successful Reintroduction of African Wild Dogs, Lycaon Pictus. 2.